Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this, the second in our series of networking webinars. My name's Karl Christmas, and with me is
Andy Cooper. Hello there.
And in the studio, of course, we have Tim and Ascot operating all that complicated lighting and video equipment in the background. We did a webinar last week.
Indeed we did, yes.
Which is all about networking, and that will be archived on YouTube very shortly. This networking webinar is called Simple Stuff That Makes You Look Clever. So if you're having a dinner party and you're inviting around a number of networking engineers, the information we will share today will make you look more clever than you would have done otherwise. What we're going to do today is we're going to review the webinar we did last week called Stuff You Need to Know. We're going to look at how to make a trunk, and we'll find out what a trunk is.
Yeah, nothing to do with swimwear.
We'll look at which cables are best and how to avoid a catastrophe. Thank you, Andy, for that pun.
You're welcome.
We'll look at what lags are, because I don't know what a lag is.
No.
And we'll also look at redundancy, getting it right the secondary time. Andy told a lot of very poor jokes last week, and I apologise for that. I hope they get a bit better as we go along today, or maybe they don't.
Can't guarantee it, Karl.
Right. So during the webinar, if you're watching this on Zoom, there is a Q&A section. Please feel free to fill in the Q&As if you've got any questions, rather than on the chat section. I'll be monitoring the questions as they come in on my laptop just here on my left. We will maybe answer some of the questions as we go along, but we'll try to answer them all at the end, providing we have enough time to get that sorted.
Yeah.
Don't put the questions in the chat, as I just said, if that's all right with you. Shall we have a look at what we talked about last week?
Let's have a talk through that, yeah, before we get onto the new information. Yeah, because last week we talked about, well, selecting a network switch, then how to monitor and control your network to make sure it's continuously working stably. Then we had these strange acronyms. Do you remember what they all mean, Karl?
Honestly speaking, I don't know what EEE stands for. I know what it does.
Energy Efficient Ethernet.
Thank you. And then quality of service and international...
Intergalactic
monetary... Don't know.
No. Internet Group Membership Protocol.
That was it.
Yeah. And then VLANs, Virtual Local Area Networks. Yeah, we had a talk about all of those and what they mean for your networking. And yeah, we've made a series of videos which are being rolled out on YouTube as well. So you can find episodes 1 and episode 2 was released today on Yamaha Global YouTube channel. So look out for them a little bit later.
Yes, we also covered the Yamaha's various different types of switches, such as the SWR range. We looked at the PoE, Power over Ethernet models. I won't go through all of those numbers and letters there. We talked about the fanless silent operation. And importantly, we looked at Dante optimization on all of the different network switches.
That's right, yeah. So all Yamaha's range of switches feature Dante optimization, which is a one-click setup to get your switch ready for carrying a lot of Dante data, no matter whether the network is small, large, or massive.
Yeah, and apart from these more sort of IT type switches, we also looked at the more rugged switches, such as the SWP range. These designed specifically for touring or event type applications where they're moving around a lot. They have redundant power supplies, big rugged chassis, and again, they're fanless and they have the same type of Dante presets. Now, over and above the fact that these have Dante presets, we also looked at the importance of being able to monitor these presets and your network and see what is going on in all of the different switches, how to set up all your VLANs and various other topics. We will be going back into this type of area today when we're looking at the new topics for this particular webinar. That included an overview of the Web Graphical Interface, or GUI, and also the Dante presets and those ever popular acronyms that I can never remember what they mean.
Indeed, yeah. And there's a couple more to learn about today.
Andy was very clear on how to set up different VLANs and what they meant, and segment your switch for different purposes, and how to keep different device types separate on your network. And today we're going to be looking at...
Yeah, well, we'll take the theme of VLANs a little bit further.
All right.
And we will start looking at trunks, because as we learned last week with VLANs, you can segment a switch, so it separates the data from one set of devices, so they don't mix with the data from another set of devices, for example. Well, still though, you need a separate cable for each type of data with VLANs. So what we're going to learn about with trunks is basically combining lots of different VLANs to share, not just share the switches, but also share some of the cabling to make your network setup and system a little bit more efficient. So like last week, I pre-made some videos to teach you about this, so we can show you in detail how to set up the switches through the graphical interfaces, and so we can show you all the connecting, and well, it's just easier to explain when you can have multiple camera angles and different visual aspects to it. So
and when it's not 9 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So we got a little video to play you. So watch this, and then we'll come back and discuss it. And remember to type in your questions as you go along, and we'll address them all in a little bit.
Yep.
A trunk is a link between two network switches, which can carry a number of VLANs. Remember last time we created 2 or 3 VLANs to segment a switch for different types of data that shouldn't be mixed. Well, imagine we have 2 switches set up like that in different locations, and we need to connect all the equipment together. You may think it needs 3 cables, 1 for each VLAN, but actually just 1 cable is enough when it's set up as a trunk. The trunk will carry the data of several VLANs from one switch to another without mixing it up. Data from VLAN 1 ports in the first switch will only reach VLAN 1 ports in the second switch. Same for the other VLAN data. They will only reach the ports associated with the same VLAN. Let's see how to set it up. I have 2 switches here already programmed with 3 VLANs each. Connect them together using 1 port in each switch that's currently assigned to VLAN 1, which is the default VLAN, used for management tasks like this. Then I can program both switches from the same connection. Consider the best port to use for a trunk. If it carries multiple VLANs, it might require additional bandwidth. If you have 10 gig ports, it makes sense to use them as trunks. If you have fiber optic ports, you could use them for a longer distance trunk. Otherwise, a standard copper port may be used, but remember the strict 100-meter limitation. Never exceed that with Cat5e, Cat6 or 7 cables. Actually, let's consider the best cables to use, as it's particularly important with trunks that they can carry a lot of data. The cable needs to be in good condition. If it's bent or squashed or stretched, its bandwidth capability can suffer. For gigabit networks, use Cat5e or Cat6 cables. Standard Cat5 is not good enough. Cat7 has an additional shielding built in, which makes it harder to install, so that's not always appropriate. One important point about cables for mobile systems is whether the copper in the cable is solid or stranded. Stranded cable has many small hairs of copper inside. It makes the cable more flexible so it can go around tighter corners or lay nice and flat on the floor of a stage. However, it will be less efficient with data transmission and might not work over distances approaching 100 meters. So, solid copper cores in the cable are better suited to trunks covering distances of 50 meters or more. Most reels of low-cost installation cable are solid copper, and so are quite suitable if they're not going to be run over or be the cause of a trip hazard. Of course, fiber optic cables have a distance advantage, up to 550 meters for multimode at 1 gigabit per second, 300 meters at 10 gig, and 10 kilometers for single mode fiber at either speed. Remember, you need the same type of fiber module at each end and a matching cable type. And you cannot link a 10 gig port to a 1 gig port. It must be like for like. There are several grades of fiber quality. For multimode, use OM3 or 4. OM1 and 2 are lower grade and so are not suitable. The fiber must have a core diameter of 50 micrometers and cladding of 125 micrometers. For single mode, use either OS1 or OS2. Both are suitable with a smaller 9 micrometer core and 125 micrometer cladding. Both single and multimode fiber modules can be fitted into the SWR switches, and the two larger models of SWR 2310 can handle 10 gig modules. SWP1 only comes with 1 gig multimode fiber ports, while SWP2 has both options with the higher capacity 10 gig ports. So, take care to select the appropriate model. Now let's get back to trunks. Remember, we want to connect 3 VLANs between 2 switches. First, we should program the fast switch. Otherwise, if you change the local switch first, it may block your access to the fast switch. From Yamaha's LAN monitor software, remember the switches are automatically discovered without needing to know their IP addresses. Using the web GUI, open the detailed settings and the VLAN menu. The operation mode of all the ports is probably set to access. Highlight the port you wish to use as a trunk to link between the 2 switches. Press Setting and change the operation mode to trunk. Then you can select the additional VLANs to assign. Keep the default VLAN 1 as the native VLAN, which is used for network monitoring and programming, as we are doing now. Click Confirm. Now, do the same with the local switch at the near end of the trunk. Select the port to convert into a trunk and assign the additional VLANs. Now, devices in VLAN 2 from both switches will be able to communicate with each other without interfering with any devices in VLAN 1. The data is kept quite separate. May I remind you again, though, to keep an eye on the bandwidth. Use LAN monitor, select the switch, and click the bandwidth tab. You certainly don't want to go beyond 80% to stay safe. If you're running Dante at 96 kHz, then more bandwidth will be used for each channel. So in that case, consider to use switches with 10 gigabit links, such as the SWP2 and the larger SWR 2310 devices. This 28GT model is particularly useful with 4 10 gig modules available. So you could use that as a central switch linking to 4 others in different places. If using 10 gig is not an option, and 1 gig may not be enough, there's a trick you can utilize. Link aggregation. This allows you to use 2 or 3 or more ports to link between the same pair of switches, creating a 2 gig or 3 gig or larger connection. SWP1 and SWP2 switches already have this programmed into Dante presets A and B for the pair of fiber ports. And preset B includes another link for the highest numbered copper ports, allowing an additional increased bandwidth switch connection. To create a link aggregation with the SWR2300 switches, or with an SWP2 switch in user config mode, go to the web GUI again. Bear in mind, this is more difficult with the SWP1, where link aggregation can only be set by using a Dante preset or programming via the command line interface. Start with one cable link between the two switches and program the fast switch first to avoid any communication interruptions. Open the Detailed Settings menu and select Link Aggregation. In the interface list, click on the New icon. Then select the associated ports, including the port which is already being used to connect this switch. Type a description in the explanation field, if you wish. Confirm and click OK. Do the same for the switch at the near end of the link. Select the same number of ports, though the ports could have different numbers. And now you can connect the specified ports with additional cables without the switches starting up their loop protection. Refresh the web GUI and monitor the link status.
Welcome back to the studio. Whilst you were watching that, I noticed there are quite a few people watching on Facebook in India and Indonesia. So if you're any of our colleagues in Gurgaon or Jakarta, a big hello to you guys. I will have a few questions I wanted to ask about that video.
I'm sure.
We haven't had any questions come in, so if you are watching on Zoom, again, feel free to ask the difficult questions for Andy and the easy ones for me. In that video, you talked about trunks. And it was a single cable leading from one switch to another. Is that a bit risky?
Well, you could think of it that way, where all your data is traveling through one cable. So if that one cable gets cut, then you lose everything. Yeah, so in that sense, you could consider it risky. So really pay careful attention to what kind of cable you're using and how you lay it or how you install it or run it through your venue. You know, take greater care over your trunk cables than you would with the others.
I mean, cabling is notoriously always going to be the risk area, isn't it?
It always has been in audio systems, hasn't it, Karl? Even with analog cables, cables probably result in 95% of all problems. It's either the cable or the connector at the end, isn't it?
I remember you doing a lot of testing on all the different cables that we used.
We did a huge amount of cable testing. I mean, we're talking well over 10 years ago when we started using network cables to carry a lot of audio data. If we have a look at this slide on the computer there. Yeah, this shows a few of the photos that from our testing time. What could we do to a cable to make it stop working? And we found we could actually do an awful lot before it gave up working. So this is our kind of joke from that time. You know, you could remove a chunk from the outer sheath of the cable. You could trap it in a flight case lid. It would still work. You could wiggle it about, tie knots in it. It would still work. You could drive trucks over it and amp racks in flight cases over it. You could badly terminate it, sort of, deliberately have a section where the twists in the cable are removed, and the cables would sort of keep working. But if you take a brand new cable out of the box, terminate it, and start using it, it's not going to work.
Why is that, Andy?
It's 300 meters long. Yeah. So you buy the cable in sort of 300 meter or 500 meter lengths, and that's far too long for it to work. If it's copper, it's got to be 100 meters or less.
Well, the first time I ever made a cable, I decided I wanted to learn, and I should learn how to make a cable.
Yeah.
So I took the cable, I cut off the sheath, I carefully stripped all the ends, and I checked all the diagram, which colour goes in which socket on the RJ45. I laid them in carefully, I clipped it on and terminated it. Then I took it to the tester, and it wasn't working.
Oh.
So I did it all again, I stripped it again, tested it again, it wasn't working. I did it 3 times, and then I found out that the cable tester was broken. So I've never done it since. I just buy my cables from now on.
Yeah, how annoying.
You were looking at Cat5, so Cat5e, Cat6 and fibre. There are some advantages to fibre versus the other types of cables, aren't there?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. I mean, fibre cables, you know, like this sort of tiny installation type, or like the rugged type with the Neutrik optical connectors. Either type, fibre is sort of capable of carrying more data a longer distance. So as we've learned, fibre can be maybe up to 10 kilometers long between network switches. But there's another advantage, and that is there's no electrical contact between the two switches or the devices. So if you have a connection between switches and they're receiving their power from different circuits, then there may be a sort of grounding lift or no good grounding connection. So using fibre means there's no electrical link, so there's no problems at all with grounding. So that's one advantage. But another thing is that there's no electromagnetic interference that's going to interfere with a fibre cable as well. So if you've got to run your network cable past a load of communications transmitters, you know, like for walkie-talkie systems or whatever, they may generate a lot of interference. Or if you have a massive LED wall for entertainment and you've got to run cables by it, they have been known to cause interference into copper cables, but no problem at all with fibre. So fibre is often a good solution to use as a trunk between switches.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before we go on to the next section, because my memory is very short-lived, can you just once more remind us the difference between a trunk and link aggregation?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So a trunk here is one cable that carries VLANs from multiple. Let me start again. A trunk is one cable that carries data from multiple VLANs.
Let's have a look at that on the screen.
Between switches. Yeah, look at this. Look at this diagram we've prepared.
Might be easier to understand.
Is it there? Yeah, there it is. So in this case, we've got one cable carrying data from the red VLAN, which is our Dante network, and also the blue VLAN, which is our office and video network.
So how often do you tour with amplifiers and a photocopier?
And a photocopier. It's incredibly useful, Karl, you know, copy your set lists.
True.
For example.
You wouldn't want to get it muddy though, would you?
Instructions or... No, I suppose you've got to be careful, yeah. It's a symbolic diagram. But I'm sure there's some tools that would take a network printer. Maybe. Let us know. Let us know in the questions and comments. Anyway, a trunk. Well, you know, in the past we've called certain roads trunk roads. In the past, maybe not so much now. But a trunk road is a highway that links two cities together, and it has multiple lanes. Well, it's just like a trunk cable connecting two switches together with multiple lanes or multiple VLANs carrying that data. So that's a trunk. Yeah, it's not the back end of a car, but it's sort of transport related. Link aggregation then, on the other hand, is using two or more cables to link between switches to give us more bandwidth. So we've got our trunk road. Let's say the traffic is making that road congested, so you add extra lanes to provide space for more traffic. And that is a link aggregation. When you first hear the word aggregate or aggregation, what does it make you think of?
Small stones, isn't it?
Yeah, like aggregate that you actually make to build a road. Funnily enough, isn't it? Yeah. When I think of aggregation, it makes me think of football games. I'm going to lose you again now, aren't I? But yeah, football games. You know, you have a home game and then you have an away game in a competition, and you aggregate the scores together to find out who won. Yeah.
I watch rugby, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah, okay, they don't do that in rugby so much, I suppose. But yeah, with football, you have two games, you aggregate the score to find out who won. Link aggregation, you have two or more cables, and you combine them together in the same route, and they work together. Some data goes down one cable, some data goes down another cable. You have more bandwidth.
We've just had a comment in from Rudiger who says, hey guys, what about putting a coffee machine on the VLAN? Would that work?
It would work for us this morning.
Yes, okie dokie. You spoke about redundancy a little earlier on, particularly when we were talking about the trunks.
Oh yes, yeah. Or the lack of redundancy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is now the time to talk about that?
I think so. So we have mentioned lags, link aggregation, as adding cables to provide more bandwidth to the network. Well, what if you didn't need more bandwidth? Could that link aggregation be used for other purposes? The next video will explain.
Yay!
Now we're going to explore different techniques for redundancy, particularly important in live events and mobile systems. Having backup cables and even backup switches can be a significant advantage for making sure the show goes on. First, let's revisit link aggregation. Remember, this is where more than one cable can travel the same route between switches to increase available bandwidth. Well, if the bandwidth is not needed, the additional cables can be used for redundancy. So, set up 2 or 3 ports in a link aggregation group using the web GUI for the SWR2310 series. Or select Dante preset A or B on a SWP1 or SWP2, where the 2 fiber ports form a link aggregation. And the last 2 copper ports form a link aggregation group with Dante preset B. Now check the LAN monitor software for the bandwidth percentage of those links. If the sum of the 2 percentages is 80% or less, it will be safe to run the link with one cable missing. So, when both cables are present, the data load is shared between them, and you can adjust the method the switch uses to share the load based on the MAC address of the destination or the IP address, for example. But when one cable gets disconnected, the switch will quickly divert all the data through the remaining cable. Though don't be surprised if there's sometimes about 1 second of silence after this occurs, but your network connection remains safe. With real-time audio, you may experience a very brief dropout or silence, but sound will recover before you even have time to react. And then, of course, you can use LAN Monitor or the web GUI to check what has occurred. So, with Dante preset B and the SWP switches, you can have a copper redundant link between stage left and stage right, for example, and a fiber optic redundant link between stage and control room or front of house. Of course, you could program the same setup for SWR2310 or 11 switch. And with the SWR2310 28GT, you're able to have 2 fiber optic link aggregations using the 4 SFP ports. So one 28GT switch could be used in the middle of the network with an 18GT at either end. Actually, each of these switches is capable of hosting 5, 10, or even more link aggregation groups. So even larger networks can benefit from redundant connections between switches. Now let me briefly mention a network switch feature called spanning tree protocol. This is another form of connection redundancy within a network where certain links are left idle until a break occurs. It was often used in legacy CobraNet audio networks, but is not so beneficial for Dante systems. In fact, when a break occurs, it could cause several seconds of silence, which is never a nice experience during a live sound event. So Dante has a better way of dealing with redundancy by using its primary and secondary network connections. We'll get to that in a moment, but just so you know, spanning tree settings can be programmed in the SWP and SWR managed switches, but not via the web GUI. Rather, you need to use a command line interface, which is much more time consuming, so I'm not going to take you there. Instead, let's look at building a secondary Dante network. To do this properly, we need twice the number of switches and twice the number of cables. You exactly duplicate the primary network and connect just the secondary ports after you have checked that no device is still in daisy chain or switched mode, because they would otherwise bridge between the two networks and make the redundancy ineffective. Remember, both primary and secondary networks can make use of the quick Dante optimization settings and the SWP Dante presets. Both networks need to carry clock signals, audio data, and control data. To allow Dante controller software to monitor both networks, use a USB network adapter or another type to give the computer two network ports, one for primary and one for secondary. Then, even if the primary switch fails, the network can still be monitored and controlled through the secondary link. And hear this, there is no noticeable audio dropout when a fault occurs in the primary network. Even when a primary switch loses power, the secondary takes over seamlessly. That is a brilliant system of resilience, though of course it requires extra hardware investment. If that is too much for you, then there is an intermediate solution, and it involves VLANs. Remember a few episodes ago when we programmed 2 or more VLANs in switches to use for different types of data? Well, we can program one VLAN for Dante primary and another for Dante secondary. However, what we shouldn't do is send both through the same trunk, because it's more likely to overload the bandwidth. We should use separate cables for connecting primary and secondary between switches anyway, to provide the redundancy we wish for. Let's see how it's done with SWP1 and SWP2, because Dante preset C is ideally set up for this. Half the ports are for VLAN 1 and the other half for VLAN 2. The first fiber port is for VLAN 1, the second for VLAN 2. There are no trunks or link aggregations. Looking at the settings in the web GUI, we can see the VLAN assignments to 1 and 2. All ports are for access, no trunks. Notice all ports have EEE stopped. IGMP snooping and query is enabled for both VLANs to manage any multicast traffic. QoS is enabled to give highest priority to Dante sync data. So basically, both VLANs have Dante optimization applied. Here's how to make the same settings with the SWR2310 switches. First, delete any link aggregation groups, or create additional ones, so you have one for the primary VLAN and another for the secondary. Then create VLAN 2 and label it secondary. Assign half the ports to this VLAN, including any fiber optic module if you have them. Then open the management menu and Dante optimization. Enable the manual setting to instantly prepare both VLANs for use with large numbers of Dante flows. That will set the quality of service and IGMP snooping correctly. Carefully connect Dante primary ports to VLAN 1 and secondary ports to VLAN 2. You can choose to share either VLAN with small amounts of non-Dante data, such as for remote control of mixing desks or wireless mic system monitoring. But now, the Dante system will survive any cable fault without an audio dropout. Of course, if a switch loses power, both networks will be interrupted, and that's the limitation of this method. So it's worth remembering that the SWP switches can have a backup power supply connected. But at least this method can be used to provide increased resilience without such a huge investment.
Great. Thank you.
There we go.
Redundancy.
Yeah.
On the subject of redundancy, have you ever been in a situation where you have not had redundancy but wished you had had a redundant network?
In terms of networking, actually, I don't think so. See, when as long as you carefully plan and manage and maintain your network, there's very little that could go wrong. You have much fewer cables than you have in an analog system, as such. So long as the cables are out of the way of people tripping or treading or stepping or leaving things on them, then you're pretty much safe. But I mean, I have worked at some massive, huge networks and systems which have had redundancy, and I can't recall one time really where the redundancy was actually needed to save a show. It was there as a backup, as a safety net, sometimes as a legal requirement for important shows, especially when they're broadcast. So it's always been there, but if you carefully manage your network, you're at very low risk.
I suppose it's a matter of scale, isn't it? And
Yeah.
balance the extra cost.
That's right, yeah. It's cost and time, isn't it, as well? How long it takes to construct and test the additional network. So a lot of people who go on tour would not take a secondary network with them to connect every day because it just takes too long to get connected. They will take spare cables and maybe a spare switch or two, but not have them connected unless there was really a fault that they needed to repair.
I think most of the problems come at setup.
Yeah,
Once
that's
the
right.
system's running,
Yeah.
it should be, as long as it's
Rock
not
solid.
kicked or some horse runs through the network. Although having said that, I remember doing a festival I was mixing. There's about, I don't know whether I told this story last week or not, but there was a network we'd put together to a redundant system, all stage boxes and the desk, and the whole thing was ruined by one of the stagehands kicking the amplifier rack and switching it off. So it was nothing to do with the network, but we couldn't do anything with it.
Yeah.
Eventually they found it.
These things happen, yeah. Human intervention. Well, yeah, it's funny. So we haven't had time to fit in any training about security, network security, in these webinars. But I have made a video in the series, Audio Networking Made Easy, which you will find on YouTube in a few weeks. So to learn about network security, have a look for that. But yeah, that talks about how to stop people from interfering with your network either by mistake or maliciously. So there are things you can do to monitor your network and have warnings or flaggings coming up if anything new gets added to your network that you're not expecting, or if anything gets removed from your network, you can instantly find out. Or you can do password protection and various other mechanisms to limit the amount of damage people can do, either by accident or on purpose.
Or you can surround your network by some guards with some very angry dogs.
Yeah, that's one way.
We have had some questions in.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you very much. Shall we take time to answer a few of the questions if we could get them right?
Yeah, let's do that.
So a good question from Jeff here. When you build a Dante secondary network, do you need to use exactly the same network switches as the primary network?
I like that question. Yeah, I like that question. Let's take a look at this slide I've got on the PowerPoint, if that's possible. Yeah, that one there. That shows a redundant system. So the red cables are your primary, the blue cables are your secondary, and just in this example, we do have 4 switches that are the same, but it doesn't have to be actually. So your secondary network could use different cable types, could use completely different switches if you wanted them to. Of course, they may need the features like IGMP snooping or VLANs programmed into them. But from a management point of view, it's going to be much easier if they are all the same, because then you can program one and then copy the settings and load that into all the others. So it's much easier. And if you need to replace anything, it's going to be easier if the switches are the same, so you can replace like for like. So from a management point of view, it's easier. But if you are struggling for resources and you do have some different types of switches that are available to you, then it is possible to build a secondary network.
Just flying the Yamaha flag here for a moment, I believe I'm right in saying that the Yamaha switches tend to be faster or quicker to reboot than many other switch manufacturers.
Yeah, that's also true, yeah.
When you've got an audio network running sound that's been interrupted, it's probably quite useful.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So if you do have to restart your switch, if someone kicked the power off by mistake, then you don't have to wait so long, yeah. So typically the SWP switches and the SWR switches we have here, the managed ones, they take a minute to get started and from power on to fully working with all data passing through is a minute. But many other brands take 2, 3, 5 minutes, even more. And the funny thing is the more sophisticated the switch, often the longer it takes to get started. Which reminds me of someone.
Why are you looking at me when you say that?
But yeah, funnily, the unmanaged switches generally are the ones that start up much quicker, and they could be ready to rock within like 10 seconds or something.
So here's a question from me.
Yeah.
You've got your primary network and your secondary network.
Yeah.
What is the secondary network doing whilst the primary network is just dealing with all the data? Is it just sitting there waiting, or what is it happening at that time?
Yeah, that's another good question. So in a Dante system, the secondary network is always active, even if it's not actually needed. Yeah. So the transmitting device always transmits its data through the primary network and the secondary network simultaneously, so you get the full amount of data bandwidth traveling through both networks. And it's the receiving device that switches between primary or secondary. So it's normally going to be receiving on the primary until it notices there's some data loss, and then it quickly switches to the secondary. Before you even hear any problem, it switches over. So the secondary is always being received. So yeah, it's always active.
All right, simultaneous.
Yeah.
Question here from Miguel. Does the type of connector affect the length a cable can be? So whether it's RJ45 or Neutrik Ethercon sort of style, for example.
Type of cable affect the length it can be? No, not really. So if you look at a Neutrik Ethercon, and if you open it up, take the metal protective barrel off it, you will find a regular RJ45 connector, just like you have on a standard Cat5e or Cat6 cable. So they're the same in that regard. How well they are terminated can make a difference on how long the cable can be, because if you have a long length where there's no twists, then the cable will be more prone to interference, and therefore it will not work so well at long distance. So a well-terminated cable should be fine. But also, like I said in the training video earlier, remember, if the cable is stranded, yeah, it makes it more flexible and more convenient to lay, but it may not carry the data so well over long distances. So it's more related to cable than connector type.
Excellent. Thank you. Final question here. If 1 gigabit bandwidth isn't enough, and you want to use a lag for redundancy, can you use 3 ports on each switch?
Right. I like these questions. Yeah, so a link aggregation group with 3 cables. If each port within the link aggregation group is a 1 gigabit per second port, then 3 cables will give you 3 gigabits per second available between the 2 switches. If you need to carry data that's, let's say, 1.5 gigabits per second, then you always need to have 2 links available between the switches. If you have 3, 1 is broken, you still have 2 gigabits per second between the switches, so you can still carry all the necessary data. Yeah. So yeah, you can do that.
Great, well done. So just a reminder, on our website on Yamaha.com is the place where you can get a lot of resources for training, downloads, and all of the various software, like the software you looked at earlier on, the LAN monitor. That can be downloaded for free from this website, amongst all the other equipment.
Spec sheets.
Yes, all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Then all of the training information can be picked up on our social media, so Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram. That's where we tend to advertise all the various training seminars and webinars that are going on.
Indeed.
And another reminder is that this and last week's networking webinar and all of the other will be archived or are already archived on our Yamaha Global YouTube, which has hours and hours worth of interesting stuff on it.
Yeah,
actually,
loads.
It's everything from sort of 2-minute segments on quick how to do this with Provisionaire Touch, or how to program something on a switch. There's so much information out there.
Yeah, there's loads of our past webinars as well, isn't there?
Yes, and for some reason I seem to look older and fatter every month. I don't know, how does that happen?
I don't think so. I think the lens on the camera is getting a little bit squashed.
Yes,
time, yeah.
we'd like to think so in our lockdown world. Well, I think it leaves us to say thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. Really appreciate you being interested in the same sort of stuff that we're interested in. So thank you very much from me.
Indeed, yeah. Thanks for your questions, and I hope you are already feeling a little bit more clever about networking. Just a reminder, yeah, to learn more, find the Network Audio Systems Made Easy series, which has started on YouTube and will continue for the next few weeks as well. There's 7 episodes to come in that series. So yeah, thanks for your time. Take care, everybody. We'll be back again sometime in the next few weeks, months, with more exciting webinar content for you. So keep a lookout, and we'll see you again soon, yes?
Yeah, in the meantime, stay safe.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.